This week, we're going to be delving into perfect competition. We'll be looking at more into like what the market structure is, what makes something a perfectly competitive market versus not. And then in our later chapters, we're going to see how just changes to one or more of those conditions will make it not perfectly competitive. So in the next couple of weeks, we'll be looking at monopolies and oligopolies, monopolistic competition. But this is sort of our foundation, our starting point of all of our models, and where we really want to have a good understanding before we try to get into less perfection. So we're going to start out by looking at what is a perfectly competitive market. We'll get into producer surplus, individual versus market supply. We'll talk more about profit maximization and how our competitive markets can choose that optimal quantity. We'll look at shutdown conditions, entry and exit, long run market equilibrium, and then we'll have some examples about how to calculate profits, calculate opportunity costs, see when someone should enter or exit the market, and see when or what the optimal level of production is. So, perfect competition is really where we have buyers and sellers as price takers, meaning no individual buyer or firm can affect the supply or demand enough to change that market equilibrium price. They're really just stuck with whatever that equilibrium is. And competitive markets don't require multiple firms competing for the same customers. And so that might sound weird. Like, how can you have competition if there's not more than one company? We're going to look at the exact characteristics of perfectly competitive markets. But one of the things you could think about is that anyone can make this product, they can sell something identical. And if one firm is charging too much, another firm will just come enter that area and start selling it. So you could think about like coffee on campus. We have I think there's like one coffee shop on campus. But if they started charging $50 for a cup of coffee, you're going to see a bunch of coffee carts popping up along the sidewalks or maybe even across the street, right? So there may not be a lot of direct competition in the immediate vicinity of campus, but if places were charging too much, someone else would move in. Now, coffee is not a great example of a perfectly competitive market because not all coffee is identical. So think of things like bananas or potatoes. Um, there's not a whole lot of good real life examples, but you could think of very competitive markets still meet or closely meet some of these requirements, and that's why we can sort of think of them that way. But we'll see in later chapters how they're actually in perfect competition. And so individual firms face perfectly elastic demand curves. They have a horizontal demand at our market price. So we're still going to have our normal supply and demand for the whole market. But when we look at an individual firm, they're just going to have a demand curve that's a horizontal line at whatever the market price is. So if demand increases, market prices go up, that demand curve will shift for our individual firm as well. And this really has to do with the fact that it's easy to join the market, easy to exit. Everyone's selling something identical. So if you raise prices even a little bit, you'll just lose all of your customers to someone else. If Ralph's wants to charge $8 for a banana, you're just gonna go to Trader Joe's and buy it for 23 cents. Or maybe a banana cart will pop up charging 50 cents, right? Someone will always be able to sell it lower because you're not selling anything unique. And so perfectly competitive markets in real life are actually very rare. But there are a lot of markets where people are price takers, especially on the buyer side. Individual buyers don't really have a lot of options. But we'll see later in the semester some exceptions to that as well. Okay, so let's look at the basically 5 conditions that an industry needs to meet to count as perfect competition. So first is that there's a large number of firms. So no single firm's actions can raise or lower the price. And you could think about that in terms of like the market supply curve, because this is made up of many firms. Even if I cut my supply, you're not going to be able to notice it. It's not going to shift supply enough to change that market equilibrium price. And because of this, they're price takers, right? So they're stuck with demand, horizontal demand at whatever that market price is. In perfect competition, we're assuming identical products or homogeneous products, meaning everybody is selling something that's exactly the same. And so customers do not care where they get it from. They're just going to buy it at the lowest price. And as a result, all firms tend to charge a similar price. Now we're going to see some differences. So even if we're talking about the market for bananas, um, right now at Trader Joe's, they're 23 cents. As of the time I'm recording this, for a very long time, they were 19 cents, like for decades. And then recently, because of all the high inflation in 2022, they eventually had to cave in and raise their prices. So recently they went up to 23 cents. I had to go change all my slides and lectures. No. Which, like is still not that much money. And I went to, I think it was Ralph's. I went to a different grocery store the other day, and then bananas were 69 cents a pound. Um, which is sort of a similar price. I think I ended up with 8 bananas that were about $2. So, around 25 cents each. So kind of a similar price. If I typically though, if I'm going to buy bananas, I put them on my list for Trader Joe's because I know it's slightly cheaper, but 25 cents isn't that big of a difference. So if I need a banana, I may not go out of my way. And so we are going to see some issues with distance, location. There are other time costs and opportunity costs that may make it so you would spend slightly more money at one store over another. But generally, the underlying cost is going to be similar. We're assuming consumers have full information, meaning you have to know what these prices mean. So if you see bananas that are 23 cents each versus 69 cents a pound, do you really know what that means? Are those easily comparable? And honestly, I don't know that they are. You kind of just know that both of those are lowish prices, and maybe you feel okay with it. For sure, if you saw something that it was like $2 each, $6 a pound, right? You would know something there, right? And consumers in real life don't have full information. It takes too much work. There's really high information costs, high opportunity costs of knowing everything. So we just try to know enough, and we have like a rule of thumb, or we have feelings about stuff. But to be a truly perfectly competitive market, consumers would have to know everything. They know the prices everywhere. They know what should be charged, and then they will leave and go to markets if one firm, if one price is too high at one firm, they're going to move and go to a different firm. We assume there's negligible transaction costs. So buyers and sellers are going to waste little time or little money finding each other. When you're thinking in terms of like bananas, you can see how that might not be true, especially if you have to drive 20 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour to a different store that has a lower price. That's not a negligible transaction cost. If it's going to be like 30 seconds or 1 minute away, that's probably much more negligible. But if it's going to take you an hour, half your day, you might want to pay that higher price because it's going to be including those time costs. And we're assuming free entry and exit into the market. So it's easy for firms to enter if, it's feasible to charge 23 or 25 cents for a banana, and all the current grocery stores decide that they're going to charge $2 for each banana, we're definitely going to see more fruit carts, small vendors, maybe even a banana shop open up that's charging 25 cents per banana. So it's easy to join. There's low barriers to entry. This typically means there's going to be low fixed costs to enter the market. So things like utility companies, electric companies, those are not going to be perfect competition. There's huge startup costs, huge infrastructure costs. It's really tough. But if you wanted to start a fruit cart, you're not going to have that many costs of startup. You're going to have some business license fees, and you have to buy a cart. You're going to have access to fruit, or maybe delivery services. But it's something that a small business could easily start. So we're going to see how different examples of firms or industries may not meet one or more of these conditions, and that's going to make the market less competitive. So if they meet all of these conditions, we say that it's perfect competition. And they'll be selling at the lowest possible price. This is great for consumers. We have access to more products at a lower price. And we're going to see as markets become less competitive, the quantity available goes down and prices are going to go up. So consumers, we like competition, but we're going to see from the firm side, they like less competition. So the more competitive market, the lower the profits are. And then we've got producer surplus. So this is the other half of economic surplus. You remember a couple chapters ago, we looked at consumer surplus. which was this top triangle over here, that extra value that our buyers got that they didn't have to pay for. And producer surplus is very similar. So it's the extra money that they get above their marginal cost of production. So we can think of this as producer profit. It'll be the profit in the whole market, so not just for an individual firm. It's the difference between their reservation price, which is the supply curve, and the price that they were paid, so that equilibrium price. We're only including companies who sold products, so we're only including actual transactions. And in this market, we can calculate the producer surplus. This is our market for burgers. And we're going to use that same formula we used last time, 1/2 base times height. So we're finding the area of the triangle. So, okay, 1/2 times base, so that's this horizontal direction, which is 60, times height, which is this vertical distance, which is about 4. So 1/2 times 60 times $4 is going to give us $120. So in this market where burgers are selling for $4 and we're selling 60 of them, we have $120 in producer profit. Some firms might be big, some might be small. We may see that one firm sells 40 of these burgers and 2 other firms sell 10. So they may not have even split of the profit, but this just tells you potentially the whole profit in the market. And when we put this together with consumer surplus, we get this whole triangle here, which is our economic surplus. And so we're going to see how producing at this point gives us that maximum economic surplus. And then in some of our later chapters, we're going to see how like monopolies reduce that surplus. Maybe they can increase producer profit by reducing consumer and economic surplus. In perfectly competitive markets, they can't change anything. So they're just kind of stuck here. So perfect competition is going to maximize economic surplus. Okay, so perfectly competitive markets maximize economic surplus. And that's because they can't control the price. So it's not going to be in their best interest to reduce the quantity they're selling. When we see like monopolies or other less competitive markets, when they reduce the quantity, it actually raises prices. But here, because there's so many producers and there's free entry into the market, if you try to lower quantity and raise prices, you're just going to lose all of your customers. So perfectly competitive markets get us to produce at that market equilibrium, maximize economic surplus. We're going to have individual and market supply. So this is similar to how we added up individual demand to get market demand. Each seller is going to decide their level of production based on their production costs, how much input they should use. As markets become more competitive, those supply curves are going to get much more similar. So in the short run, maybe we have some innovation, we have some differences in how our firms are producing. But in perfectly competitive markets, eventually what happens is they all adopt those same processes to get to that lowest possible production cost and maximize their profits. So in perfect competition, firms will have identical supply curves since they face their same production costs. We're going to add our supply curves horizontally to get that market supply. So horizontally means you start at $1. So in this case, we'll say $2. Ben wants to make 3 ice cream cones, and at $2, Jerry wants to make 4 ice cream cones. So our market supply at $2 is 7 ice cream cones. So we're adding the quantities up at a particular price. And you can see how Ben and Jerry don't have identical supply curves, but eventually they are going to adjust. So if you're looking at low quantity of production, Ben can make an ice cream cone for $1, but Jerry would need at least $1.25. But as our quantities get higher, Jerry's actually much more efficient. So at $2.50, he can make 6. At $2.50, I didn't draw this very well. Ben can make maybe 4, right? And so it seems like at larger quantities, Jerry is more efficient. Ben's going to figure out what he's doing. He's going to copy that, and eventually they will have identical supply curves. And so the goal of our firms is going to be profit maximization. So it doesn't matter what type of market structure you're in. you're going to want to maximize your profit. How can you get the most possible money? And not just total revenue, you want total profit. So we're trying to get the most total profit, not the most total revenue. So in perfectly competitive markets, our individual firms are facing a horizontal demand curve. They're going to be price takers. And what this means is that demand, that price, is also equal to marginal revenue and equal to average revenue. This is not going to be the case when we get to imperfect competition. We're actually going to have some slightly different curves. But for now, they're just going to be the same. So perfectly elastic demand means firms can't raise prices even 1 penny without losing all of their customers. And they can't lower their prices either because they're already producing at that lowest possible cost. Then they would have negative economic profit and they might as well just switch and go produce something else instead. So profit is the extra revenue earned above fixed and variable costs of production. And remember, we're including opportunity cost in those fixed costs. So profit is going to be our total revenue minus our total costs. And total revenue is going to be price times quantity. Total cost. There's a couple ways we can do this, but when we're looking at our cost curves, the easiest way to do that is by saying average total cost times quantity. We can also just add up total fixed costs plus total variable costs, and then plus opportunity cost if it's separate. Otherwise, we assume it's part of fixed costs. So when we do this, we're going to end up with profit is equal to quantity times price minus average total cost. So the difference between what it's costing to produce an item and the price that the company's earning for it times the number they're selling is going to give you profit. And so you could see for a perfectly competitive firm, if they produce lower than what that optimal is, prices stay the same and they're just going to be losing profit because that quantity is going to go down. So, all right, profit maximization. How much to produce? We're assuming that firms can sell at any level of output they want, but they're just sort of stuck at that market price. And so we're going to use our marginal analysis rule, where marginal cost is equal to marginal revenue. This is going to help us find that best quantity. So this is similar to when we did utility maximization. We looked at the different marginal utilities per dollar or marginal product of labor. I think that was in our last chapter versus marginal product of capital. We'll be looking at the end of this chapter. We'll be looking at if you can produce two different things. You want to make sure that marginal revenue of your two activities is the same. And so we're going to use this to find our best quantity. But remember, our goal is highest profit. And in some cases, that means we're trying to minimize our losses. Sometimes that means we're just trying to get the most possible positive profit. But the goal is how do we maximize that total profit? Firms are limited by their cost of production and they're limited by the market price. So they're not just going to sell a million or an infinite amount. They have to make sure that extra revenue is going to cover their extra cost of production. And if you remember from economies of scale, you actually often have increasing costs as you increase your production size. So profit maximization is going to occur at the output where price equals marginal cost. Okay, so why price? Well, we have this horizontal curve here at the price, and because it's constant, it's also our marginal revenue curve. So every extra quantity they sell is going to give them that same extra marginal revenue. So if I sell one more, I'm going to get that same price. If I sell one less, I'm going to lose that price. In imperfect competition, we'll see we actually have a separate marginal revenue curve and we have decreasing marginal revenue. But for perfect competition, it's going to be constant. So what we're going to do is we're going to find that point. We're going to go to where our marginal cost curve is. We're going to go to wherever that price is, and we're going to mark it with a point on our graph. So if you don't see that horizontal line, you just find it yourself. Okay, so the average total cost, average variable cost. And if it just said price is $8, you find $8. You find that point on your marginal cost, and that's going to tell you what to do. Okay, so we go there, and then we're going to go down to the quantity. So it looks like in this case it's about 55. So in this market, if our market price is $240 for tutors, we're going to see that we're going to get a quantity of 55. Profits can be positive, negative, or zero. So this is going to tell you the best point to produce in the short run. And we're going to look at when you should exit in just a minute. How we're going to find the profit is first we want to do total revenue. So we found where marginal cost hits the price, go down to find the quantity. So 55, multiply that by the price of 240. And then we want to subtract total cost. So we're going to find that on our graph with average total cost. So it's going to be where 55, quantity of 55 hits average total cost. And that looks like it's at about what? 210? I'm just estimating. Maybe 220. So total cost is going to be 55 times 210. So my profit is going to be total revenue minus total cost, or 55 times 240 minus 210. Okay, so this is good. I'm making positive profit, or whoever is in this market is making positive profit, because they're making $30 in profit for each item. So plug this into your calculator. Oops. And you should get about 1,650. For your homework, if you have like a problem set question on this, it's okay to estimate. So if you have a graph and it's not like obvious where the lines are supposed to be, it's okay if you're a little bit off. So if you estimated this at 220 or quantity of 54, 56 or something like that, that would be okay. For multiple choice questions on the test, I'll try to make it obvious where the points are, but please feel free to let me know if you don't think it is. So positive profits are going to happen when price is greater than average total cost. So you'll get a positive profit. You're making more than what is costing for each item. Negative profit is going to be the opposite. So price is less than average total cost. So in this case, if the market price is $60, they're going to be making negative because it doesn't matter what quantity they're producing. Those average costs are always going to be higher than the price. And then you can have zero economic profit. That's going to happen where they're equal. So price is equal to average total cost. That's going to give you zero economic profits. And remember, this is economic profit. So that means you could still have a positive accounting profit, but you're not going to earn more money from doing something else. So positive means that this is better than your other option. Negative means your other option is better. And zero means they're both the same. So you might as well stay. So when should a firm shut down? When should they exit the market? Obviously, when they're losing money, right? We're actually going to see that we have two different conditions. We're going to have a long run shutdown condition and a short run shutdown condition. So in the long run, this is going to be more than a year, definitely more than 3 years. The actual definition of long run, it sort of depends, somewhat vague. But firms have to decide how long they want to stay in and when they should shut down. So in the long run, price needs to be high enough to cover total costs, so total variable and fixed costs. So price, this is what they're paid. This is the amount they earn for selling something, and their total costs are what they have to pay to produce that. So in this case, that's going to be here at point A. This is sort of the break-even point where we have zero economic profit. This is going to be where this is the lowest point on our average total cost curve. So lowest average total cost. This is also the point where average total cost is equal to marginal cost. So in the long run, they need to be producing at that point where marginal cost equals average total cost, which equals the market price. And then anything below that, they should shut down in the long run. So in this example, that looks to be at about $125. So if the market for tutors goes below 125, they should just exit the market. It's not going to be worth it. They're just going to be losing more and more money the longer they stay in. Okay, so the shutdown price is below average total cost in the long run. So that point where marginal cost hits average total cost, it's its lowest point. This is also the profit maximizing level in a competitive market. So we're going to see, because of entry and exit, that supply curve is going to be shifting left and right, basically until the market settles here. So we're going to see that in the long run, perfectly competitive markets are going to make zero economic profit, and we're going to have that equilibrium price at $125 for this market. So perfectly competitive firms have zero profit. Why do they still operate? Remember, this is zero economic profit, not zero accounting profit. So this just means between like their two options for production or two options for jobs, this point makes it so that both of their options give them the same outcome. And it's not like every company has the option to produce everything. Or even if you're just looking at people and jobs, so I specialize in things related to economics and financial markets. So I can have jobs that have the term analyst in the name, anything to do with finances. Um, I couldn't be a brain surgeon though. Not that I don't necessarily have the capacity to do that, but I currently do not have the skill level. So for me to switch from being an econ professor to a brain surgeon, that's going to be a really big jump. I'm going to have to go back to school for a very long time. And at least at this point in my life, it definitely would not be worth it. So it's not that they're in the most profitable market that exists, but they are in an equally profitable market compared to what their other option is. And in the short run, we actually have a different condition. So in the short run, if total costs are greater than total revenue, companies have to decide like how long to hang in there. Oftentimes, new small businesses, they do take a while to become profitable. You have to find customers, maybe advertise, build up that client base. Maybe you're charging too much or too little, and you sort of have to figure all that stuff out. Sometimes it just takes a while for the production process to start, and maybe you set up your store. That could take a year. You have to hire people. So it's not just like you're going to be profitable immediately. And on that last slide, this point B, that low point of average variable cost, we're going to see that's our short run shutdown condition. So in the short run, prices need to be enough to cover variable costs. Okay, so short run shutdown is going to be average variable cost. Anything below that average variable cost curve, you're going to be losing money by producing more. And the idea here is that you're going to be minimizing losses. So the assumption is that you already have started your business, you're already operating, and you're deciding, should you keep going or should you shut down? So on our graph, okay, here's average total cost. Here's average variable cost. Pretend like this is not a terrible graph that I just drew. Our long run point is point A, and our short run shutdown point is point B. So if price is less than average variable cost, you should always shut down. You're going to be spending more to produce the next extra item than the amount of money that you're going to make. So if price is less than average variable cost, producing anything is going to increase your losses. But if price is between point A and point B, so the price is less than average total cost, but greater than average variable cost, you're actually going to be minimizing your losses. So you'll be covering all of your variable costs and some of your fixed costs. So you've already spent the fixed costs. There may be sunk costs in the short run. And so maybe you don't have enough to pay for all of your fixed costs, but you might have enough to pay for some of your fixed costs. So it looks like this is around 11 cents on this graph down here. Whoops. I don't know what I did. Okay. We'll just say this is like 11 cents. And the current market price is 14 cents. So you're covering your full 10 cents of average variable costs, and you're also covering 4 cents in your fixed costs. So you're reducing losses. You're still going to have a negative profit, but it's going to be less than if you had just produced nothing. So if you produce nothing, you're not going to be covering any of your fixed costs, and you're going to have a much greater loss. So we would say you shut down in the short run if prices are below average variable cost. And like we talked about just a minute ago, how long is the short run? It depends. Maybe 1 year, maybe 2 years. It's never more than 3 years. Why will the losses stop? Well, we're going to see entry and exit into the market, which is going to cause that supply curve to shift. You may see an increase in demand for this product, which is going to cause prices to go up. Like in this example up here, we've got a marginal revenue curve up here. Maybe demand increased in this market significantly, and now people are willing to pay 40 cents per pound of radishes, which gives this market a positive profit. So maybe you get more customers, market prices rise. Maybe there's an exit from other suppliers that shifts, some of those customers over to you as well as increases prices. Okay, we're gonna pause here. I'm gonna stop and then I'm gonna start a new video. So go take a break, do some jumping jacks, take a nap, and then come back and do the next video.